Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone, to the afternoon session of this CGIAR Development Dialogue. My name is Tony Simons, the Director General of one of the CGIAR Consortium Centres, the World Agroforestry Centre, ICRAF, based in Nairobi, Kenya. So our session today, our dialogue, our discussion in the next 30 minutes is around achieving profitability and sustainability in agricultural land use in the face of climate change. Hannah and the organisers have asked me to be a bit controversial this afternoon, and I'd like to apologise in advance because I can't quite read all of their handwriting. But nonetheless, we dealt with the problems of productivity and environmental decline, and we framed them as either or. Either we could have productivity and environmental decline, or we could have environmental sustainability and it would affect productivity. It was seen as opposing one another. And perhaps the second dialogue or debate that we framed incorrectly is around profitability and the private sector. And that is, we can either have profitability and social inequity and social exclusion, or if we want full social inclusion and social equity, it's going to be affecting our profitability. And we overlay that with productivity and environment. Those are the two major issues our panel are going to help us debate today. So I'd like to call the panelists forward. We have three of them. We have Howard Minigh, the President and CEO of CropLife. Please come forward, Howard. We have, very well known to us, Sonja Vermeulen, the Director of Research from CCAFS, Climate Change and Agriculture Food Security CGIAR program. And we lastly have Halldor Thorgeirsson from UNFCCC, the Director of Strategy, and he promises today it's gloves off. He's not going to be politically correct, so we look forward to that, Halldor particularly. So we're going to give each of them 2 minutes airtime for to pitch their perspective and views on these issues of profitability and achieving sustainability in the face of climate change. And then we're going to pose a couple of provocative questions to them and leave some time, hopefully, for the audience to engage as well. So if you don't have a chance to answer a question from the audience, please write it down on a piece of paper and we'll include it in the proceedings and get you an answer from it. But we ask any interventions from the floor to be exceedingly brief because we are running to tight schedule. So let's turn first to Howard. Tell us a little bit about CropLife.
CropLife International represents the plant science industry. That's the companies who develop and market new innovative technologies and seeds, biotech traits, and crop protection products.
Speak to the audience.
Thank you.
Sorry, Howard, yes. Please speak to the audience rather than address me. Great. So, and your perspective on this issue of achieving sustainability and profitability simultaneously?
Well, indeed, we face big challenges in terms of food security as well as climate change. And we need to do more, we need to innovate, and we also need to implement a lot more in terms of adoption of those technologies, particularly in the developing world. But we shouldn't ignore and put in perspective the achievements that we've already made. For example, we harvest about 3 times what we did 50 years ago on the same amount of land. And in the United States, we grow an acre of corn using 50,000 gallons less water, and we get today 40 bushels of corn more than we did 20 years ago. But the part of doing more should be about implementing the vast wealth of information and technologies that we already have, particularly in the developing world, that are common in the developed world. And CropLife sponsored the very groundbreaking report by IFPRI entitled Food Security in a World of Natural Resource Scarcity to help enable better farming decisions. This report looked out to 2050 with different climate change scenarios. It overlaid and modeled the impact of 11 technologies on 3 of the major staple crops. It even has the ability to drill down to the local level. The private sector over the years has had a very outstanding record in terms of being able to innovate new technologies and to deliver them to farmers in the developed world. In countries that lack infrastructure, we need more help. An example of this is the very successful public-private partnership in Africa that was put together in 2008. It's called Water Efficient Maize for Africa. To date, they've achieved yields in the neighborhood of approaching 8 tons per hectare, whereas the norm is less than 2 tons. But despite the progress that's been made, it's on a fairly limited scale. There's still way too many farmers, in fact most, who are still producing below the 2-ton level. So to feed a growing population, having large swaths of farmland that are producing at 20% of the potential is certainly not sustainable. We need to do more to disseminate the technologies and get them used in the developing world that brings us up to what is commonplace in the developed world.
Great, great. Thanks very much, Howard. So turning to Sonja. Sonja, the Director of Research from CCAFS, how does achieving profitability and sustainability resonate with yourself?
Well, thanks, Tony. Well, I think we're in very exciting times at the moment. This concept of climate-smart agriculture, which we've seen with the launch a couple of days ago with the Global Alliance on Climate-Smart Agriculture, is very welcome, and it's causing excitement for breaking down 3 key silos. The environmental silo, with its concern about mitigation of greenhouse gas emissions and other environmental impacts of agriculture. The development silo, concerned about raising farmers' incomes, improving livelihoods of the 500 million smallholder farmers around the world. And thirdly, the nutrition and food security silo, who are concerned with urban consumers and with national food baskets. So we're seeing that, we're seeing those silos breaking down. But I think also what's really important about what's happening here is that we are seeing the importance of sharing responsibility across the whole food chain. So I think we're seeing this now in the development of the new Sustainable Development Goals, where we're expecting shared goals for consumers and for producers and for all countries. And I think we're also seeing it in the private sector. So, for example, the CLUA, the Climate and Land Use Group, released this week to be at the time of the UN Climate Summit, a report that's showing how some of the major companies are committing now to zero deforestation in their operations, particularly in the palm oil sector. So you're seeing there, this is coming up more and more in private sector commitments of not just thinking about their own company's practice, but going far beyond that to their suppliers and also to their consumers at the other end. And I think moving forward, we should be thinking more and more in these terms, bringing smallholders more effectively into markets and into these kinds of incentive systems, and thinking holistically across whole food systems. Thanks, Tony.
Great, thanks very, very much indeed, Sonja. And moving to Halldor, what about the perspective from the UNFCCC and international negotiations on achieving profitability from human enterprise and sustainability?
Thank you very much, Tony, and I'm very happy to be here. Just so you know, 10 years of my life I devoted to agricultural research, so I have some affinity with what you're trying to do. But I really want to start by underlining the importance of aligning the objectives that climate-smart agriculture are attempting to do. And I actually see this as being very similar to what happened in the energy enterprise, where the 3 objectives were brought together in sustainable energy for all. There had been a tension between the access agenda on one hand and the energy efficiency and renewable energy agenda. And I also want to tell you that it's going to take time, so be patient, and it's easy to declare that one is bringing together objectives. The challenge really is to then make it real, and I would actually suggest that really makes the research component of this enterprise extremely important, so that it doesn't become an empty platitude. What I really wanted to underline, though, with you is to really think through some of the time frames. So I think it is important that we are clear on where we're going with all of this. And many of you are familiar with the 2 degrees upper limit of acceptable warming. It's important not to think of it as a goal. It's basically the climate convention that I work for is basically a planetary risk management treaty. And its objective is to keep climate change under a limit that prevents dangerous anthropogenic interference with the climate system. So it's not, 2 degrees is not a question of feasibility. It's a question of how much risk is acceptable. And therefore, please don't think of this as, well, we'll go to 2 degrees if the cost is under a certain level. But it's also extremely important to understand that we are not on track at the moment. And you know these numbers. But what I really wanted to bring to you is to think a little bit about the second half of the century, because it will give direction to what we do now. And that is the reality that in the second half of the century, this planet needs to be in a climate neutral state. What that means, it means that all emissions will need to be balanced by removals from the atmosphere. And I would suggest to you, maybe you should actually start thinking about agriculture and activities on the land in a different context. It's really about managing the carbon cycle. And what is it, you know this, but let's underline, what is it that makes soil fertile? It's carbon. And there's enormous amounts of carbon that can be, that have been lost from both soils and land, and there's really is not much attention to this. You might wonder, well, what's the connection to profitability? What I think if one wants to be profitable in the long term, one needs to create value. Because that's where profit comes from, is value. And of course, one of the values, of course, is food, but there are other values. And you know this better than I do, but I really wanted to underline the importance of this. Because what we are basically launching, and that is my final comment, is we are now launching a major effort to actually stay under 2 degrees. And that is what the Paris Agreement is all about. And that will require more than action by governments. It calls for unprecedented level of cooperation and innovation. And it definitely can be done, but it won't be done if there isn't a determination to deliver. So that's really, I really wanted to appeal to you to think big, think long term, and then act on it in the here and now.
Great, thanks very much indeed, Halldor. Okay, we've come to the controversial question session, and I have a list here of controversial questions from Hannah. So to Howard, to the private sector. Question number 1, I can't ask that, it's too controversial. Question number 2. You're very convincing, Howard, very convincing. I mean, essentially you were telling us you're trying to save the world while making money. But we put it to you, aren't most private sectors rapacious profit-seeking enterprises? If they can get it from one place, that's great. If not, they'll move elsewhere. There's no loyalty, particularly to smallholders, fly-by-night operators. So is this not negatively affecting sustainability?
Well, let me first say that saving the world and making money are 2 good things. They're not bad things. And the mission of CropLife International and all of our member companies agree with this and adhere to this, is helping farmers grow. So our success really depends upon the success of millions of farmers around the world. So it isn't about making a quick buck here and running to find the next farmer. It's about consistent long-term relationships with farmers, understanding farmers' needs, bringing value to them so that they can increase productivity, and at the same time leave less of an environmental footprint. And a lot of it is about reducing their risk. And many of the products that our industry provide to farmers do exactly that. They improve many of the biotech traits in combination reduce the risk of farmers by increasing resilience so that their crops are more stable and more sustainable to stresses that come from higher temperatures and drier climates. Mm-hmm. So it comes down to their success determines our success.
Great. Saving the world while making money and having a good time. Love it.
Exactly.
Okay, we're moving on to Sonja. Sonja, controversial question number 7.
Okay.
Researchers love researching the problem. We heard about 2 degrees from Halldor. You want thousands of degrees of freedom in your experiments. You want to replicate. You need more evidence. It's very applied and very ivory tower.
Yeah.
How do you explain what you do to that small-scale farmer? What's the value of research to them as they're trying to achieve sustainability and enter value chains?
Okay, that's a great question, because it's one that we're really struggling with in this climate smart arena. We are told that we need to reach scale, we need to reach massive scale within a few years. Some of you may know the 25 by 25 program in Africa, where NEPAD and partners that include many NGOs and others are trying to scale out climate smart agriculture to 25 million farming families by 2025. We get these pressures in our work all the time. We're not just doing research, we're doing research for development. And the way that we see it is as a twin track. We need to actually we need to take calculated risks and go with technologies that do have promise and that can be taken up, that farmers will be interested in. And we need to do that right now, while on another track, continuing to test, improve, refine. Now, from a farmer's perspective, I think it's all about incentives. Really, we often think in terms of program implementation, but really we should be creating that space where their set of choices are increased and where they have financial, cultural incentives to take things up which actually suit their portfolio of needs.
Great. Halldor. Now, if you're wanting to find Halldor after the session and you go to Iceland to his ancestral home, don't look at his surname, that last name, Thorgeirsson, because you won't find it in the telephone directory. In Iceland, you look up the first name, Halldor, so that's where you will find him if you're wanting to get in touch with him. But Halldor, international negotiations, aren't they like swimming through treacle? I mean, almost, you spoke about risk, but isn't it a big risk to put something under a UN framework convention? You talked about climate neutrality, and that's the problem, is our vehicle for moving forward is in neutral because it's the lowest common denominator, it's common and differentiated responsibilities, but it actually goes round and round in circles. And so how are we going to break out of that deadlock? It's been now 17 years since Kyoto, and we've had 17,000 tons of documentation in the 6 official languages of the UN. Where are we going with all of this, Halldor?
Well,
And we don't hold you personally responsible.
No, I was thinking about kind of how honest I can be, and you warned me that this is webcast. Perhaps I should underline the transformation that we are going through, and the negotiations have been not stopped. They're not stalled, but they have not been able to actually influence directly investment decisions. And in other words, somebody on Wall Street doesn't need to worry about what the Climate Convention does. But what is happening now is that the economics are changing. So the investment options in clean energy are now at parity. The problem is much clearer to everyone. But by the way, I want to warn you, my sense is that we haven't really seen much yet. It's actually going to get quite a bit worse before it gets any better in terms of climate impacts. So that signal is going to get stronger. And mobilization by civil society and everyone is changing. And I found it extremely inspiring to walk with 400,000 people I could never do that in Iceland. We're only 300,000. And so that is something that is inspiring. And so what I'm basically telling you is that the negotiations are a reflection of the state of this issue. And so don't blame the negotiators, but change the dynamic. And I think it's actually happening. I felt that, and my boss, Christiana Figueres, I think encapsulated this very nicely by looking at three things. We must act on climate change, we can act on climate change, and we will act on climate change. The must comes from the science, from the mobilization of will to do this. The can comes from the solutions, from the reality that you can actually change the energy structure, but what we are now at is, will we do it? And so this has really shifted from the question of why act on climate change to this question of why not act on climate change. And so, but then what is the role then? I'm not shifting the responsibility to people working on the street. There is a hugely important role for international climate policy, and it's moving very much in the direction of two things. Setting the long-term direction, and that's why I was passionately talking to you about the 2 degrees, and ensuring transparency and accountability. And that's what this new agreement is going to be very much about, the one that's coming out in Paris a year from now. It's going to be on a much stronger, all governments will bring their, this is an important term, nationally determined commitments to the table. Nobody will impose this on them. They will decide what they bring. And then there is the accountability structures around that and transparency. But added to that is the mobilization of non-state actors and all levels of government. And so central governments, federal governments are not controlling how cities are designed. They don't have the levers that you need for a lot of these changes. And finally, Tony, the most inspiring point for me at the summit was when the insurance industry came to the table and said, well, we have 30 trillion under management. We only put 32 billion into clean investments. And they said, we will double that by Paris, and we will increase it tenfold by 2020. And then we also had pension funds coming and say, we will decarbonize our portfolios. And so I think what is now going to be happening is that the investment or asset managers are now going to be wondering what on earth is going on.
Great, thanks very much. So we turn to the audience for a couple of extra controversial questions from you. And to address the gender imbalance we have on the stage, we're going to give preference to our female colleagues in the audience today. Controversial questions, ladies. Could you please identify yourself and be short with your question?
Sure, Gloria Gonzalez with Ecosystem Marketplace. I hope this is controversial enough for you, but question about whether it's realistic for the UNFCCC to continue to focus on that 2-degree Celsius mark given the current trajectory, and whether it's a better approach for the UNFCCC to focus on actually managing the risk of a temperature increase that will likely be far beyond that amount.
Okay, we're gonna take a series of questions and then give a right of reply to our 3 panelists. Other questions?
I need a mic for questions.
Okay, other questions? Hands up.
I'll repeat the question.
Good afternoon. My question is a very simple
Identify
one.
yourself, please.
Oh, sorry. My name is Letitia Obeng. I'm on the board of IMI, International Water Management Institute. And having mentioned the word water, my question is, what role is water resources going to play in the work on climate smart agriculture?
Excellent question. Thank you. I'm not going to say anything. Oh, sorry, there's a lady here. Louise?
Hi, I'm Louise Jackson from University of California, Davis. And my question is about profitability and sustainability and people staying on the farm. if farms are profitable and people manage to get more education, how do we view that in what we're looking for in terms of long-term sustainability and having people have a more rich set of experiences in their lives than just staying on the farm?
Okay, one last question from the ladies. Okay, any men feel that they would like to join the group? You're feeling underrepresented? No, wow, well there we have it. Let's have a closing word then from, we've heard 3 different vocabularies and 3 different perspectives here. So we'll take private sector research and United Nations. Closing words, Howard, please.
Well, I'll try to address the question around people staying on the farm. A lot of it comes down to the type of farming operation that it is, and we try to bring people in the developing world up to more entrepreneurial farmers so that they become much more market-oriented. If you look at the developed world, farming has become much more of a business in which you have young people that have college degrees. They're managing farming as a business and lots of different assets, how they deploy those assets, the investments they make, looking at returns on investment and many, many factors. They're very, very astute in terms of understanding what goes into their business and how they market the product that comes out. So I think in terms of enriching the life experience for people, it's more about bringing more parts of the world into using farming as a business as opposed to perhaps a way of life.
Great, thanks. Sonja?
Yeah, well, thank you. And just to add to that, we've just released some back-of-the-envelope calculations today, and we estimate that even though there's so much urbanization, population growth is enough, that we should expect a rise to about 750 million smallholder farming people around the world by 2030. So this is a really important, continues to be a very important agenda. But just to turn to the question on water, I mean, obviously water is central. Most of the climate change impacts are around changes in the frequency of rainfall, glacier melt, flooding. We all know this, and we know that the major part of the adaptation agenda is dealing with that variability and change. But I think an important point to add there is also how much of an important part of the mitigation agenda it is. And a couple of points here. I mean, a major hotspot for decreasing our emissions from agriculture and food systems is in rice production. And many of the gains that we can make to reduce methane emissions from rice are actually about controlling the water cycle, water inputs and outputs in paddy rice through the season. So we see that, and also, again, going back to this big food chain perspective, a paper that came out last year said, in fact, in terms of mitigating the greenhouse gas emissions from food systems, we can probably make about 4 or 5 times the amount of impact by working on the consumption, waste, demand end of the spectrum rather than on the supply side. And again, water really comes into that. Just to give one example, Unilever looked at the impacts, greenhouse gas impacts of one of their products, Lipton tea. The majority actually comes from consumers putting on and turning off their kettles, how they're managing water and energy. It's big. Water matters a lot. Yeah.
Great, thank you. Halldor.
Yes, the question was why focus on the 2 degrees and not prepare for impacts for greater warming than that. We are really working on both fronts at the same time. And, but here is the stark reality I wanted to share with you. We really know already, we're already locked in at least for the next 15 years in terms of impacts. And so the campaign now to change the energy system to reduce emissions is really about the impact load after 2030. Mm-hmm. And at the same time, you need to prepare for immediate impacts, and they will only grow. And we're coming close. I'm always talking in centigrade here. We're coming close to a 1 degree warming already, and you see the impacts. And in some cases, actually, an adaptation and mitigation strategy actually come together. you actually achieve two things at once, and particularly actually in your sector. By the way, it also very much connects to water cycling as well. And so one should not create a dichotomy between the two, but I must tell you that I'm concerned in terms of Paris about the lack of ambition in terms of really thinking about how we will cooperate on adaptation and impacts. It is such, everybody says it's important, it needs to be strengthened, but we need actually to translate that into what that really means. So there's no lack of focus on impacts and adaptation, but you can't only focus on that. So we have to do both.
Great. So in a moment I'm going to ask you to show your appreciation to our panelists, but as a closing remark, let us just remember that those people who try to simultaneously achieve profitability and sustainably live longer, have more friends, and thirdly, enjoy a better love life. And if you don't believe it, try it and see. Please show your appreciation to our panel.